He thought he was just taking shelter from a mountain storm. But when Marcus Kane pried open that frozen safe hidden in an abandoned treehouse, he discovered $260 million and a secret that would change everything. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The wind didn't just blow through the Colorado Rockies that December afternoon. It screamed. It tore through the pines like something alive, something angry, bending trees that had stood for 100 years and shaking snow from branches in blinding white sheets. Marcus Kane pulled his hood tighter against his face, ice already forming on his beard, and checked his GPS for the third time in 10 minutes. The screen flickered, then died. He cursed under his breath, shoved the device back into his pack, and kept moving. He was a wilderness survival guide, 38 years old, with a decade of experience leading groups through terrain most people only saw in photographs. He knew these mountains. He respected them. But respect didn't mean control, and right now the Rockies were reminding him exactly who was in charge. The storm had come out of nowhere. The forecast called for light snow, maybe 4 inches by nightfall. Instead, the sky had opened up like a wound, dumping what felt like 4 feet in 4 hours. Visibility dropped to nothing. The temperature plummeted to something brutal, somewhere near 10 below zero, maybe colder with the wind chill. Marcus had been leading a solo expedition, a personal trip to clear his head before the holiday rush, and now he was paying for that solitude. His planned route back to base camp was gone, buried under drifts taller than his waist. The trail markers were invisible. Even the ridgeline he'd been following had disappeared into white chaos. He'd been walking for 6 hours, maybe 7. Time lost meaning when every step looked identical to the last. His legs burned. His lungs ached from breathing frozen air. The cold had worked its way through his layers, settling deep into his bones. He knew the signs of hypothermia. He'd taught classes on it: confusion, fatigue, slurred thinking. He wasn't there yet, but he was close. He needed shelter, not in an hour, not in 30 minutes. Now, that's when he saw it. At first, he thought it was a trick of the storm, a shadow cast by swirling snow and failing light. But as he stumbled closer, squinting through the white, the shape solidified. A structure, high up in a cluster of ancient ponderosa pines, maybe 20 feet off the ground, built between 3 massive trunks that had grown together over centuries. It wasn't some kid's treehouse cobbled together with plywood and nails. This was deliberate, engineered, constructed with real lumber and metal brackets. The walls were solid, the roof angled to shed snow. A narrow ladder, partially frozen, led up from the ground. Marcus stopped, breath coming in ragged clouds. He stared up at it, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Who the hell builds something like this out here? He was miles from any marked trail, deep in protected wilderness where construction was illegal. Yet there it was, waiting like it had been expecting him. He didn't have the luxury of questions. His fingers were numb. His core temperature was dropping. He grabbed the ladder and started climbing, boots slipping on ice-covered rungs. The wood groaned under his weight but held. When he reached the platform, he found a door, a real door with hinges and a handle, not just a tarp or a sheet of plywood. He pushed it open and crawled inside. The interior was dark, but it was dry. And compared to the hell outside, it felt almost warm. Marcus collapsed onto the floor, gasping, shaking uncontrollably as his body tried to generate heat it didn't have. He lay there for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 30, just breathing, just surviving. Slowly, the shaking subsided. Feeling began to return to his fingers, painful and sharp. He forced himself to sit up and take stock. The treehouse was bigger than it looked from outside. Maybe 12 feet by 15 feet, with a ceiling high enough to stand in. The walls were insulated. He could see the layers where panels had been removed and replaced. There was a small wood stove in one corner, a metal chimney pipe running up through the roof. Shelves lined the walls, most of them empty now, but a few still held supplies. Canned goods covered in dust, a box of matches sealed in wax paper, a kerosene lamp with half a tank of fuel. In another corner, A sleeping platform with a rolled-up sleeping bag, still sealed in plastic like it had been waiting for someone. Marcus's mind raced. This wasn't some temporary shelter. Someone had lived here, or planned to. The construction alone would have taken weeks, maybe months. The materials would have needed to be hauled in piece by piece, probably under cover of darkness to avoid detection. Whoever built this had resources, skills, and a reason to disappear. He stood slowly, legs still unsteady, and moved to the stove. He opened the door and peered inside. It was clean, ready to use. A small stack of kindling sat in a metal box beside it, bone dry and brittle with age. Marcus grabbed a handful, arranged it carefully in the stove, and struck one of the matches. The flame caught immediately, spreading through the kindling with a soft crackle that sounded like music. He added larger pieces, then a split log he found stacked against the wall. Within minutes, heat began to radiate into the small space. He pulled off his gloves and held his hands near the warmth, wincing as circulation returned. His mind was already working through the logistics. He was stuck here, at least until the storm passed. That could be hours, could be days. He had some food in his pack, enough for 2 days if he rationed. Water wasn't a problem, he could melt snow. The stove meant warmth, the structure meant protection. He'd survive. But as his body thawed and his thinking cleared, curiosity took over. He began to explore more carefully, running his hands along the walls, checking the corners, opening drawers in a small handmade cabinet. Most were empty, but one held a stack of papers, yellowed and brittle. He pulled them out carefully and held them near the lamplight. Maps. Hand-drawn, incredibly detailed maps of the surrounding area. Trails that didn't appear on any official chart. Coordinates marked in pencil. Elevations noted in the margins. And at the center of one map, a small X with 2 letters beside it, JP. Marcus set the maps aside and continued searching. In a sealed plastic container under the sleeping platform, he found more. A journal, its leather cover worn smooth, pages filled with tight, precise handwriting. Photographs, maybe 20 of them, showing a man in his 40s with dark hair and serious eyes. In some, he was alone. In others, he stood beside a young girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, both of them smiling in front of mountains or beside a lake. On the back of one photo, written in fading ink, Sarah, age 9, last summer, before everything changed. Marcus flipped open the journal. The first entry was dated July 7th, 1986. If you're reading this, then I'm either dead or I've finally had the courage to come back. Either way, the truth needs to be known. My name is James Patrick Morrison. I was a DEA agent for 12 years, and I'm the man who stole $260 million from the people who were never supposed to have it in the first place. Marcus's heart stopped. He read the line again, slower this time, making sure his frozen brain wasn't playing tricks. $260 million. He looked up from the journal, scanning the small room with new eyes. His gaze landed on the floor near the far wall. One of the boards sat slightly higher than the others, almost imperceptible unless you were looking for it. He moved toward it, knelt down, and ran his fingers along the edge. There was a seam carefully cut, expertly hidden. He pulled his knife from his belt and worked it into the gap. The board lifted easily, revealing a hollow space beneath. And inside that space, bolted to the support beams below, was a safe. Military-grade, matte black, with a digital keypad that somehow still glowed faintly red in the darkness. Marcus sat back on his heels, his breath caught somewhere between his lungs and his throat. The storm howled outside, shaking the walls, but inside the treehouse, everything had gone quiet. He stared at the safe, at the keypad, at the journal still open in his other hand. Somewhere in these pages was the story. Somewhere in this room was a secret that had been buried for nearly 40 years. And Marcus Kane, a man who'd spent the last 5 years running from his own past, had just stumbled into someone else's. He closed his eyes, listening to the wind, feeling the warmth from the stove, and tried to decide if he was ready for what came next. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, the safe waited, patient and silent. holding a fortune and a truth that someone had died protecting. Marcus opened the journal again and began to read. The handwriting was small, methodical, the penmanship of someone trained to document facts with precision. Marcus settled onto the floor near the stove, the journal balanced on his knees, and read by the flickering light of the kerosene lamp. The storm outside became background noise, a distant roar that no longer mattered. What mattered was the story unfolding in his hands. James Patrick Morrison had been a DEA field agent stationed in southern Colorado during the height of the cocaine trade in the 1980s. He'd worked the border, tracked shipments, built cases against cartel operators who moved product through the Rockies like it was a highway. He'd been good at his job. Too good, maybe. By 1985, he'd earned a reputation as someone who couldn't be bought, couldn't be scared, and wouldn't quit. That made him valuable to his agency. It also made him a target. The journal entries started routine. Surveillance reports, notes on suspects, frustrations with bureaucracy. But around December of 1985, the tone shifted. Morrison had gotten wind of a major shipment, not drugs, but money. Cash being moved from distribution cells back to cartel leadership in Mexico. $260 million in small bills packed into trucks, guarded by men with automatic weapons. It was supposed to move through the mountains under cover of a winter storm, using back roads that didn't officially exist. Morrison's superiors told him to stand down, let the money move, track it to the source. But Morrison didn't trust the order. He'd seen too many operations go sideways, too much evidence disappear, too many witnesses recant. He suspected someone in the chain was dirty, so he went rogue. He and two other agents he trusted, men whose names were redacted in the journal, intercepted the shipment on a remote mountain pass during a blizzard, not unlike the one raging outside now. The ambush was quick, brutal, efficient. The guards didn't expect federal agents. They expected rivals. By the time they realized what was happening, it was over. Morrison and his team secured the money, all of it, loaded into 3 SUVs. Then came the decision that would change everything. Marcus read the entry dated December 19, 1985, 3 times. We radioed it in, told command we had the money, requested extraction. The response came back within 10 minutes. Stand by, coordinates to follow. But something in the dispatcher's voice didn't sit right. Too calm, too scripted. I'd worked with him for 4 years, and I knew when he was reading from a card. I pulled my guys aside, told them my gut said this was wrong. They thought I was paranoid. Maybe I was, but I'd rather be paranoid and alive than trusting and dead. We split up. They took one vehicle back toward base. I took the other 2 and drove deeper into the mountains. By dawn, I heard on the radio that my partners had been killed in an ambush. Cartel retaliation, the report said. Their vehicle was found burned out, bodies inside. The money they were carrying, gone. Just like that, 2 good men were dead, and the official story made it sound like they'd screwed up. I knew better. Someone on our side had sold them out, and that same someone would come looking for me next. Marcus exhaled slowly, his pulse pounding in his ears. Morrison had taken the money and disappeared. Not to get rich, but to stay alive. He'd hidden the cash and gone underground, leaving his life, his career, his daughter, everything, because the people hunting him weren't just criminals. They were his own. The journal continued over weeks, then months. Morrison described how he'd moved the money in stages, burying portions in different locations, always staying ahead of whoever was tracking him. He'd used survival skills learned from years in the field, living off the grid, avoiding cameras, paying for everything in cash. He'd grown a beard, changed his name, worked odd jobs in small towns across 3 states. And slowly, carefully, he'd begun to plan something bigger. I'm not keeping this money, Morrison wrote in an entry from March of 1986. I didn't risk my life just to become what I was fighting against. But I'm not giving it back either. Not to an agency I can't trust. Not to a system that got my partners killed. I'm going to use it the way it should have been used all along. I'm going to help the people the cartels destroyed. The families, the communities, the kids who grew up with nothing because their parents got hooked or killed or locked up. I just need time. Time to figure out how to do it without getting caught. Time to make sure Sarah is safe. Time to make this right. But time, Marcus realized as he turned the pages, was something Morrison never got. The entries became sporadic after mid-1986. There were gaps, weeks where nothing was written, then sudden bursts of activity. Morrison described building the treehouse, hauling materials up the mountain piece by piece over the course of 2 months. He'd chosen this location because it was remote, invisible from the air, accessible only to someone who knew exactly where to look. He'd installed the safe, transferred the bulk of the money into bonds and gold to preserve its value, and documented everything in case something happened to him. The final entry was dated November 4th, 1987. I'm sick. Have been for a while, but it's getting worse. Coughing up blood. Chest feels like it's full of glass. I think it's pneumonia, maybe worse. I should go to a hospital, but I can't risk it. Too many questions. Too many eyes. Sarah's safe, living with her aunt in Oregon. She thinks I'm dead, killed in the line of duty. It's better that way. She gets the pension, the benefits, the honor. She doesn't get the target on her back. If I don't make it through this winter, then this place dies with me. Maybe that's how it should be. Or maybe someone will find it someday. Someone who'll finish what I started. If that's you, if you're reading this, then listen. This money isn't yours. It's not mine either. It belongs to the people who suffered while men in suits looked the other way. Use it to build something real. Use it to prove that one person can still make a difference. Don't let my death be for nothing. Marcus closed the journal slowly, his hands trembling. He sat in the silence, the weight of Morrison's words pressing down on him like the snow outside. Somewhere in this room, inside that safe, was a fortune that had cost 2 men their lives and driven another into hiding. A fortune that had been waiting for nearly 40 years for someone to find it. And now, by sheer chance or fate or the cruel randomness of a winter storm, that someone was him. He stood and walked to the safe again, kneeling beside the open floorboard. The digital keypad glowed softly, waiting. 8 digits. Morrison had to have left the code somewhere, hidden in plain sight for someone smart enough to find it. Marcus grabbed the journal again and flipped back through the pages, scanning for patterns, for numbers that repeated, for anything that stood out. Then he saw it. At the top of each map, written in small print in the corner, were coordinates. Latitude and longitude marking the location of the treehouse. But one set of numbers was written differently, bolder, traced over multiple times like Morrison had wanted to make sure they didn't fade. Marcus pulled out his own notebook and copied them down, then converted them the way any navigator would. Degrees, minutes, seconds, 8 digits total when you stripped out the symbols. 395872114. His heart hammered as he turned back to the safe and entered the numbers slowly, carefully, his finger hovering over each button. When he pressed the final digit, there was a soft beep, then a click, then the sound of metal sliding against metal as the locking mechanism disengaged. Marcus gripped the handle and pulled. The door swung open with a whisper, revealing the darkness inside. He grabbed the lamp and held it close. Stacks of bills, bundled and wrapped in plastic, filled the bottom third of the safe. Above them, small gold bars, each one stamped with serial numbers and weight. And on top, folders, dozens of them, filled with bonds, stock certificates, land deeds, all made out to shell companies with names that meant nothing. Marcus reached in with shaking hands and pulled out one of the bundles of cash. $100 bills, 50 to a stack, wrapped tight. He counted 6 stacks in the bundle, $30,000, just sitting there like it was waiting for him to pick it up. He set it aside and reached for another. Then another. He stopped counting after 12 bundles. The math was already impossible. This wasn't the full 260 million. Morrison had clearly moved portions elsewhere. But what remained was more money than Marcus had seen in his entire life. Millions, tens of millions, maybe more. He sat back against the wall, breathing hard, staring at the open safe like it might disappear if he blinked. His mind spun through 1,000 thoughts at once. What do I do? Who do I tell? Can I even tell anyone? The storm howled outside, rattling the walls, reminding him that he wasn't going anywhere. Not tonight. Maybe not tomorrow. He was trapped here with a dead man's secret and a fortune that could either save him or destroy him. Marcus pulled his knees to his chest and closed his eyes. He thought about his own life, the one he'd left behind 5 years ago when everything fell apart. The wife who'd walked out, the daughter he barely saw anymore, the career as a search and rescue coordinator that he'd thrown away after one mistake, one missed call, one hiker who didn't make it home. He'd come to the mountains to disappear, to guide strangers through wilderness so he didn't have to face his own. And now, here he was, sitting in a frozen treehouse with enough money to rewrite his entire existence. But it wasn't his money. Morrison had been clear about that. This wasn't a treasure. It was a responsibility, a mission left unfinished. And if Marcus took it, if he opened this door, then he was stepping into something bigger than survival. He was stepping into a legacy. He opened his eyes and looked around the small room. The stove still crackled softly. The lamp cast long shadows on the walls. Outside, the storm showed no signs of stopping. He thought about Morrison, alone up here, sick and dying, writing those final words in the journal. He thought about Sarah, a little girl who grew up thinking her father was a hero, never knowing he'd sacrificed everything to do the right thing. And he thought about himself, a man who'd spent 5 years running from his failures, hiding in the mountains because he didn't know how to face the world anymore. Maybe, Marcus thought, maybe this wasn't an accident. Maybe the storm didn't just bring him here by chance. Maybe Morrison's ghost had been waiting for someone broken enough to understand what it meant to lose everything, and desperate enough to try building something new. He reached for the journal one more time and read the final line again. "Don't let my death be for nothing." Marcus exhaled slowly and nodded to the empty room. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, I won't." The wind screamed outside. The treehouse shuddered, and somewhere deep in the mountains, buried under snow and time, a secret that had waited 40 years finally found the man who would carry it forward. Morning came slowly, filtering through gaps in the walls as pale grey light. Marcus woke stiff and cold despite the dying embers in the stove. He'd slept in his sleeping bag on the platform, the journal clutched against his chest like a child holding a teddy bear, his breath fogged in the frigid air. The storm had quieted sometime during the night, replaced by an eerie silence that felt almost threatening. He sat up slowly, every muscle protesting, and looked toward the open floorboard where the safe still gaped like an open mouth. For a moment, he wondered if he'd dreamed it all. Then he saw the stack of bills he'd left on the floor, and reality crashed back. He fed the stove, coaxing the fire back to life, then moved to the single small window. Snow had drifted halfway up the glass. Outside, the world was buried. The pines sagged under impossible weight, their branches bent nearly to breaking. The ground, what little he could see of it, was smooth and unbroken, a white desert that erased all landmarks. He was trapped. No question about it. Even if the storm had passed, moving through snow this deep would be suicide. He'd sink to his waist with every step, exhaust himself in minutes, and freeze before he made it 100 yards. He was here for at least another day, maybe 2. Marcus turned back to the safe and knelt beside it. In the cold light of morning, with a clearer head, he began to inventory everything properly. He pulled out each bundle of cash and stacked them in neat piles. 30 bundles total, each containing 6 stacks of $50 $100 bills. He did the math 3 times to make sure. $9 million in cash, just sitting there, waiting. Beneath the cash, the gold bars. He counted 12 of them, each one stamped with weight and purity markings, 400 troy ounces each. He wasn't an expert, but he knew gold was trading somewhere around $1,200 an ounce these days. He pulled out his phone, realized it was still dead, and estimated in his head. Roughly 6 million in gold, give or take. Then came the folders. He opened the first one carefully, his cold fingers clumsy with the paper. Inside were bearer bonds, the kind that didn't have names attached, the kind that were basically cash if you knew how to move them. Each bond was worth $100,000. He counted 20 in the first folder, 2 million. The second folder held more, the third, fourth, fifth. He stopped counting after the seventh folder. His brain couldn't process the numbers anymore. This wasn't 9 million. This was 50, maybe 60 million, possibly more. And if Morrison had built multiple caches, if this was just one location among several, then the full 260 million wasn't a fantasy. It was real. Marcus sat back, dizzy, his heart pounding. He looked at the journal again, then at the photographs scattered across the floor. He picked up the one of Morrison and Sarah, the father and daughter, smiling beside a lake. Sarah would be in her 40s now, maybe 45. Did she know? Did she have any idea what her father had done, where he'd gone, what he'd left behind? Morrison wrote that she thought he was dead, killed in the line of duty. Was that still true? Or had she spent the last 40 years searching for answers? Marcus stood and paced the small room, thinking, calculating, trying to figure out what the hell he was supposed to do. His first instinct was to call someone, the authorities, the DEA, let them sort it out. But Morrison's journal made it clear there were dirty agents involved, people who'd killed to keep this money hidden, and that was 40 years ago. Who knew how deep the corruption went now? If Marcus called the wrong person, if word got out that he'd found Morrison's cash, he wouldn't just be giving up the money. He'd be painting a target on his own back. His second instinct was simpler, darker. Keep it, all of it. Disappear the way Morrison had. Change his name, leave the country, start over somewhere warm where $9 million could last 3 lifetimes. He could see his daughter again, set her up for life, make up for all the years he'd missed. But even as the thought formed, it felt wrong. This wasn't his money. Morrison had been clear. It belonged to the people the cartels had destroyed, and Marcus, despite everything he'd lost, despite all his failures, wasn't a thief. He moved back to the shelves and began searching more carefully. There had to be more information, more clues about what Morrison had intended. He found a small metal box tucked behind a stack of canned beans. Inside were more documents, newspaper clippings from the 1980s, stories about cartel violence, communities torn apart, families destroyed. Morrison had highlighted certain passages, underlined names, written notes in the margins. Santa Rosa, 12 families displaced. Durango, clinic burned, 3 dead. Las Cruces, school shut down, no funding. These weren't random clippings, they were targets, places Morrison had planned to help. Beneath the clippings, Marcus found something else. A letter sealed in a plastic bag, addressed simply, "To whoever finds this." His hands shook as he opened it. The handwriting was Morrison's, but weaker, shakier, clearly written near the end. If you've made it this far, then you've opened the safe. You've seen what's inside, and you're probably wondering what the hell you're supposed to do with it. I don't blame you. I've been asking myself the same question for 2 years. Here's what I know. This money was stolen from people who stole it first. The cartels took it from communities, from families, from kids who never had a chance. They bought politicians, killed cops, destroyed lives. When I intercepted it, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I'd turn it in, let the system work. But the system was broken. My partners died because someone in our own agency sold them out. I took the money because I didn't trust anyone else with it, but I'm not a saint. I'm just a man who made a hard choice and ran out of time to fix it. So now it's your choice. You can turn this in, hope it goes to the right people, and probably end up dead for your trouble. You can keep it, live like a king, and carry the weight of all the people this money could have helped. Or you can do what I couldn't. You can finish the mission. Use it the way it should have been used. Quietly, carefully, one community at a time. Build clinics, fund schools, help families get clean, get jobs, get hope. Don't be a hero. Heroes get killed. Be a ghost. Be smart. Be patient. And for God's sake, don't trust anyone who wears a badge until you've verified their entire life story. This isn't a treasure, it's a burden. But it's a burden that could save lives if you're brave enough to carry it. Good luck. You're going to need it. James Patrick Morrison. Marcus read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and set it aside. His head throbbed, his chest felt tight. He walked to the window again and stared out at the endless white. Somewhere out there, beyond the snow and the trees and the mountains, was the world he'd left behind. The job he'd quit, the family he'd failed, the life he'd thrown away because he couldn't handle the guilt of one mistake. And now, here in this frozen treehouse, he was being offered something impossible. A second chance, not for himself, but for people he'd never meet, strangers in towns he'd never visit, families destroyed by violence he'd never witnessed. It was insane. It was dangerous. It was probably going to get him killed. But for the first time in 5 years, Marcus felt something other than emptiness. He felt purpose. He turned away from the window and looked at the safe, at the money, at the photographs of Morrison and Sarah. "Okay," he said aloud, his voice rough. "Okay, I'll do it. But I'm going to need help, and I'm going to need to know the whole story." He grabbed the journal and began reading again, this time taking notes, documenting everything Morrison had written. The names of the dirty agents, all redacted but with enough context clues to narrow them down. The locations of the other caches, described in code but traceable if you knew how to read coordinates. The contacts Morrison had trusted, people who'd helped him disappear, people who might still be alive. And most importantly, the details about Sarah. Where she'd been living, who she'd been living with, the last time Morrison had seen her. Hours passed. Marcus worked methodically, filling pages of his own notebook with details, cross-referencing dates, building a timeline. The stove burned low, and he fed it again. He ate a can of beans he found on the shelf, cold and tasteless but necessary. His phone remained dead. The snow outside remained deep, and slowly, piece by piece, a plan began to form. He couldn't do this alone. He'd need someone who understood how money moved, how to convert bonds without raising flags, how to build shell companies and funnel cash into legitimate projects. He'd need legal help, financial help, logistical help. But more than that, he'd need someone who understood what Morrison had been trying to do, someone with a personal stake in finishing the mission. He'd need Sarah. Marcus looked at the photograph again, at the little girl smiling beside her father. She'd be middle-aged now. She might not even remember Morrison clearly, but she was his daughter. And if anyone deserved to know the truth, it was her. The question was how to find her. Morrison had written that she'd gone to live with an aunt in Oregon, but that was 40 years ago. She could be anywhere now. Married, remarried, moved a dozen times. Tracking her down would take resources Marcus didn't have. Unless. He looked at the stacks of cash. He had resources now. More than enough to hire a private investigator, to dig through records, to find one woman in a country of 300 million people. It would take time, but he had time. The snow wasn't going anywhere. Neither was he. What happens next will turn this frozen treehouse into the starting point of something extraordinary. Reveal a family secret buried for decades and prove that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can find isn't money, but the truth. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. By the third day, the storm had finally broken. Pale sunlight filtered through the clouds, turning the snow into a blinding field of white. Marcus had spent the previous day reinforcing the treehouse, making sure everything was secure, and, most importantly, re-hiding the safe. He'd closed it, locked it, replaced the floorboard, and scattered dust over the seam until it was nearly invisible again. He'd kept one bundle of cash, $30,000, and tucked it deep in his pack. The rest stayed where Morrison had left it, waiting. He'd made his decision. He was going to find Sarah. He was going to tell her everything. And together, they were going to finish what her father had started. But first, he had to get off this mountain alive. The descent took 6 hours. The snow was waist-deep in places, and Marcus had to break trail every step of the way. His legs screamed, his lungs burned, Twice he punched through a hidden drift and sank to his chest, clawing his way back to the surface with his heart hammering. But he kept moving, using the maps Morrison had drawn to navigate terrain that no longer looked anything like it had 4 days ago. By the time he reached the ranger station at the base of the mountain, the sun was setting, and he was half dead from exhaustion. The ranger on duty, a woman named Collins he'd worked with before, took one look at him and rushed outside. "Jesus, Kane, we thought you were dead. Search and rescue has been looking for you for 3 days." Marcus collapsed into a chair inside the heated station, gratefully accepting the coffee she pressed into his hands. "Got caught in the storm," he said, his voice hoarse. "Found shelter. Waited it out." Collins nodded, relief flooding her face. "You're lucky. We lost 2 hikers last week in a storm half that size." She didn't ask questions, didn't push for details. Marcus was a professional. If he said he'd survived, he'd survived. That was enough. That night, alone in his small cabin on the outskirts of town, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with his laptop open. He'd charged his phone, checked his messages, 47 from friends and clients asking if he was okay, and then he'd started searching. Sarah Morrison, Oregon, born approximately 1977. Father James Patrick Morrison, DEA agent, killed in the line of duty 1987. He tried a dozen variations, cross-referencing public records, social media, obituaries. Nothing. Either she'd changed her name, or she'd gone completely off-grid. He tried a different approach. He searched for James Patrick Morrison himself, looking for official records, death certificates, memorial pages. He found a brief mention in a DEA database, publicly accessible but sparse. Agent Morrison, killed during a cartel ambush, December 1987. Survived by daughter Sarah, age 10. Posthumous commendation for bravery. The record listed his last known address as Las Cruces, New Mexico, and the contact for next of kin, Patricia Morrison, sister. The aunt. Marcus leaned back, thinking. If Patricia had taken Sarah in, then she might still be in contact. She'd be in her 70s now, maybe 80s. But people that age tended to stay put, especially in small towns. He ran a search for Patricia Morrison, Las Cruces, New Mexico. 3 results came back. 1 was too young. 1 was marked deceased as of 2003. The 3rd had an address listed in a quiet neighborhood on the east side of town and a phone number that showed as active. Marcus stared at the number for a long time. His finger hovered over the call button. Then he set the phone down. Not yet. This wasn't a conversation you had over the phone. This required face-to-face, trust, proof. He'd need to show her the journal, the photographs, maybe even take her to the treehouse if she agreed. But first, he needed to make sure she was even willing to listen. The next morning, Marcus packed a bag, loaded his truck, and started driving south. The trip to Las Cruces would take 2 days if he pushed it. He didn't push. He stopped in small towns, ate at diners, slept in cheap motels. He used the time to think, to rehearse what he'd say, to prepare for the possibility that Sarah wanted nothing to do with her father's past. By the time he pulled into Las Cruces on a cold January afternoon, he'd gone over the conversation 100 times in his head. None of the versions felt right. The house was small, stucco painted pale yellow, with a neat yard and a chain-link fence. A truck sat in the driveway, older model, well-maintained. Marcus parked across the street and watched for a while. An older woman came out to check the mail, thin, grey-haired, moving carefully like her knees hurt. She glanced at Marcus's truck, didn't seem concerned, and went back inside. Marcus took a deep breath, grabbed the journal from his bag, and walked to the front door. He knocked twice. The woman answered, her expression cautious but not unfriendly. "Help you?" Marcus cleared his throat. "I'm looking for Patricia Morrison." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Who's asking?" "My name is Marcus Kane. I'm a wilderness guide from Colorado. I found something that belonged to your brother, James Patrick Morrison." The color drained from her face. She gripped the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "That's not possible," she whispered. "My brother died 40 years ago." Marcus held up the journal. "I know. But before he did, he left something behind. and I think his daughter needs to know about it." Patricia stared at the journal, at Marcus, at the street behind him like she was checking to see if he'd brought company. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. "You better come in." The living room was tidy, filled with old furniture and photographs on every surface. Patricia gestured for Marcus to sit, then lowered herself into a recliner across from him. Her hands shook slightly as she folded them in her lap. "I haven't heard that name spoken aloud in 30 years, she said quietly. "Sarah doesn't talk about him, doesn't even keep his picture out. It's too painful." Marcus leaned forward. "Is she here, in Las Cruces?" Patricia shook her head. "No, she lives up in Taos now, has for the last 15 years. She's a teacher, high school English, never married. Keeps to herself mostly." She paused, her eyes searching Marcus's face. "What did you find?" Marcus opened the journal and set it on the coffee table between them. "Your brother didn't die in a cartel ambush. He went into hiding because people on his own side wanted him dead. He intercepted $260 million in cartel money and disappeared because he didn't trust the DEA to do the right thing with it." Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. Marcus continued, his voice steady. "He built a shelter in the mountains, hid the money, documented everything. He got sick, pneumonia probably, and died alone up there in '87. But before he did, he left instructions. He wanted the money used to help people, communities destroyed by the drug trade, families with nothing. He ran out of time, but he left a roadmap for someone else to finish it." Patricia was crying now, silent tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "He was always trying to save everyone," she whispered. "Even when we were kids. He couldn't stand to see people hurting." Marcus nodded. "He left this for whoever found it. And he left something else. A way to make things right. But I can't do it alone. I need Sarah. She deserves to know the truth about her father, and she deserves the chance to finish what he started." Patricia wiped her eyes with a tissue pulled from her sleeve. "She's going to think you're insane, or trying to con her. She's been burned before, people claiming they knew her father, trying to get money or attention." "I know," Marcus said. "That's why I'm not asking you to set up a meeting. I'm asking you to call her. Tell her I exist. Tell her I found something real. And if she wants to know more, I'll be at the Desert Rose Motel on the north side of town for the next 3 days." He stood, leaving the journal on the table. "That's her father's handwriting, his words. You can verify it. And when you do, when you know I'm telling the truth, ask her if she's ready to meet the man who found her father's last message." He walked to the door, then turned back. "One more thing. If she decides to come, tell her to come alone. And tell her not to trust anyone in a federal uniform until we've figured out who we can trust." Patricia nodded slowly, clutching the journal to her chest like it was made of gold. Marcus left her there, drove to the motel, checked in, and waited. 2 days passed. He didn't leave the room except to get food. He sat by the window watching the parking lot, wondering if Sarah would show, wondering if he'd made a massive mistake. On the 3rd day, just as the sun was setting, a silver sedan pulled into the lot. A woman stepped out, mid-40s, dark hair pulled back, wearing jeans and a heavy coat. She stood beside her car for a long moment, staring at the motel, clearly debating whether to go through with this. Then she walked toward his door. Marcus opened it before she could knock. They stood there, looking at each other, 2 strangers bound by a dead man's secret. "Sarah Morrison?" he asked. She nodded, her expression guarded, arms crossed. "You're Marcus Kane." "I am." She looked past him into the room, checking to see if he was alone, then met his eyes again. "My aunt says you found my father." Marcus stepped aside, holding the door open. "I found what he left behind, and I think it's time you knew the whole story." Sarah stepped into the motel room slowly, her eyes scanning every corner like she expected someone to jump out. Marcus closed the door behind her and gestured to the small table by the window where he'd laid out everything he'd brought. The journal, the photographs, the maps, and the letter Morrison had written to whoever found the cash. She didn't sit. She stood with her arms still crossed, her jaw tight, her entire body radiating suspicion and something deeper, something that looked like old pain wrapped in scar tissue. "Before you say anything," she began, her voice steady but cold, "I need you to know that I've heard stories about my father my entire life. Conspiracy theories, people claiming he faked his death, people saying he was dirty, that he ran off with cartel money. I've had reporters knock on my door. I've had strangers follow me. I've had my phone tapped twice by people I never identified. So whatever you're about to tell me, whatever you think you found, I've probably already heard some version of it." Marcus nodded slowly. "I understand, and I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to look at the evidence and decide for yourself." He picked up the journal and held it out to her. "This is your father's handwriting. Your aunt confirmed it. Read it. Take your time. I'll wait outside if you want." Sarah hesitated, then took the journal from his hands. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. Her eyes moved across the first page, and Marcus saw the moment recognition hit. Her expression cracked, just for a second, before she pulled it back together. She sank into the chair and began to read. Marcus moved to the door. "I'll be right outside. Take as long as you need." He stepped out into the cold evening air and leaned against the railing. The parking lot was mostly empty. A couple of cars, a semi-truck idling near the office, the distant sound of traffic on the highway. He lit a cigarette, even though he'd quit 3 years ago, his hands shaking as he brought it to his lips. Inside that room, Sarah Morrison was reading her father's confession. She was learning that everything she'd been told about his death was a lie, that he hadn't died a hero in a cartel ambush, that he'd lived for almost 2 more years alone in the mountains, hiding a fortune he'd stolen from criminals because he didn't trust his own agency. Marcus didn't know how she'd react. Anger, grief, disbelief, all of the above. He just knew that once she finished reading, nothing would ever be the same for either of them. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Marcus finished the cigarette and immediately lit another. Finally, the door opened. Sarah stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She was holding the letter Morrison had written, the one addressed to whoever found the cash. "Is it real?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "All of it?" Marcus nodded. "Every word. I found the treehouse 5 days ago during a storm. I was going to die out there if I hadn't stumbled onto it. The safe, the money, the bonds, the gold, it's all still there, hidden, waiting." Sarah's legs seemed to give out. She sat down hard on the concrete step outside the door, her head in her hands. Marcus sat beside her, giving her space but staying close. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Sarah looked up at him, her expression raw. "I was 10 years old when they told me he was dead. They said he died protecting people, that he was a hero. They gave us a flag and a medal and a pension. My aunt raised me on that story. Every time I struggled, every time I felt alone, I told myself that my dad had been brave, that he'd given his life for something that mattered. And now you're telling me he spent 2 years hiding in the woods with stolen money." Marcus shook his head. "That's not what I'm telling you. I'm telling you your father was a hero, just not the kind they give medals for. He didn't die protecting a corrupt system. He died trying to fix it. He took that money because people he trusted betrayed him. He hid it because he didn't want it going back to the same broken system that got his partners killed. And he spent his last 2 years documenting how to use it the right way, to help people, to build something real. He ran out of time, but he left a map. For you." Sarah wiped her eyes roughly. "Why didn't he come back for me? If he was alive, if he was hiding, why didn't he find a way to contact me?" Marcus pulled out one of the photographs, the one of Sarah and Morrison by the lake. He wrote about that, in the journal. He said keeping you away from this was the only way to keep you safe. The people who killed his partners would have come after you if they thought you knew anything. By staying dead, he made sure you were protected. It cost him everything, but he did it because he loved you." Sarah took the photograph, her hands shaking. She stared at it for a long time. tears falling silently onto the faded image. "I don't remember that day," she whispered. "I don't remember his face. I was so young. All I have are pieces, his laugh, the way he smelled like coffee and leather, the way he used to call me his little navigator because I was good with maps." She looked at Marcus, her eyes desperate. "I need to see it. The treehouse, the safe. I need to see where he spent his last days. I need to know this is real." Marcus had been expecting this. He nodded. "It's a hard trip. The snow is deep. It'll take 2 days to get there, and that's if the weather holds. But I'll take you. I'll show you everything." Sarah stood, wiping her face. "When do we leave?" Marcus looked at her carefully. "Are you sure? Once you see it, once you know where it is, you're part of this, and your father made it clear this isn't safe. People killed for this money 40 years ago. If word gets out that it's been found, they'll kill again." Sarah's expression hardened. "My father spent 2 years alone in the mountains protecting something he believed in. The least I can do is see what he died for. So when do we leave?" Marcus stood as well. "Tomorrow morning, early. Bring warm clothes, good boots, and anything you need for 2 days in the back country. And Sarah," she looked at him, "don't tell anyone where you're going. Not your aunt, not a friend, no one. If someone asks, you're visiting a college friend in Colorado Springs. That's it." Sarah nodded once, her jaw set. "Okay, I'll be ready." She turned to walk back to her car, then stopped and looked back. "Why are you doing this? You could have kept the money, disappeared. No one would have ever known." Marcus thought about that for a moment. "Because your father asked whoever found it to finish what he started. And because 5 years ago I made a mistake that cost someone their life. I've been running from it ever since. Maybe this is my chance to do something right." Sarah studied his face, then nodded slowly. "Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., don't be late." They met in the motel parking lot just as the sky began to lighten. Sarah arrived in hiking boots and a heavy parka, a backpack slung over her shoulder. She looked like she hadn't slept. Marcus hadn't either. They loaded into his truck without much conversation and started the long drive north. The highways gave way to mountain roads, which gave way to dirt trails barely wide enough for the vehicle. They stopped once for gas and coffee, eating breakfast sandwiches in silence while the sun climbed higher. By early afternoon, they'd reached the trailhead where Marcus had started his journey a week earlier. The snow was still deep, but a few other vehicles in the lot suggested the trails were passable, at least the marked ones. Marcus grabbed his pack and a pair of snowshoes for Sarah. "From here, we hike, 5 miles to a ridge, then another 2 miles into unmarked territory. It's going to be slow." Sarah adjusted her pack and nodded. "I'm ready." They started walking. The first few miles weren't bad. The trail was packed down by other hikers, and the snowshoes distributed their weight enough to keep them from sinking. But once they left the marked trail and started climbing into the high country, everything changed. The snow deepened. The terrain grew steeper. Every step required effort, and within an hour, both of them were breathing hard. Marcus led the way, breaking trail, using Morrison's hand-drawn maps to navigate. Sarah followed without complaint, her face set in determination. They didn't talk much. The work was too exhausting for conversation. But every time Marcus glanced back, Sarah was there, keeping pace, refusing to fall behind. By late afternoon, they reached a small clearing Marcus recognized. He'd passed through here on his way down the mountain days earlier. He called for a break, and they sat on a fallen log, drinking water and eating energy bars. Sarah stared out at the endless expanse of whitened trees. "He lived out here," she said quietly. "Alone. For 2 years." Marcus nodded. According to the journal, he'd come into town every few months for supplies. Always different towns, always paying cash. But most of the time, yeah, he was alone. Sarah shook her head slowly. "I don't know if that makes him brave or crazy." "Maybe both," Marcus said. "Most brave things look a little crazy from the outside." They pushed on as the sun started to dip toward the horizon. Marcus knew they wouldn't make it to the treehouse before dark, so he started looking for a place to camp. He found a dense grove of pines that offered some protection from the wind and enough dry space to set up a small tent. They worked together, clearing snow, pitching the tent, gathering wood for a fire. By the time darkness fell, they had a decent camp and a fire crackling in a ring of stones. They sat close to the flames, eating freeze-dried meals heated with boiling water, the warmth seeping into their cold bones. Sarah broke the silence first. "Tell me about the storm, the one that brought you to the treehouse." Marcus poked at the fire with a stick. "It came out of nowhere. I've been guiding in these mountains for 10 years, and I've never seen anything like it. Visibility dropped to 0. Temperature fell to 10 below in less than an hour. I was following a ridge back to base camp when I lost the trail. GPS died. I knew if I didn't find shelter, I was dead." He paused, remembering the fear, the cold, the desperation. "I saw the treehouse through the snow. Thought I was hallucinating at first, but I climbed up, found the door unlocked, and got inside just in time. If your father hadn't built that place, I wouldn't be here." Sarah stared into the flames. "So he saved your life, even 40 years after he died?" Marcus nodded. "Yeah, I guess he did." They sat in silence for a while, the fire popping softly, the wind whispering through the pines. Then Sarah spoke again, her voice quieter. "I need to know something, and I need you to be honest. Do you think my father was a good man?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I think he was a man who found himself in an impossible situation. His partners were killed. The people he trusted betrayed him. He could have walked away, kept his mouth shut, played it safe. But he didn't. He took a stand, even though it cost him everything. Does that make him a good man?" Marcus looked at her. "I think it makes him human, flawed, complicated, but trying to do the right thing even when there was no clear right answer." Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes glistening in the firelight. "I spent my whole life angry at him for leaving. Even though they told me he was dead, part of me always felt abandoned. Like if he'd really loved me, he would have found a way to stay." Her voice cracked. "But he did love me. He just loved me enough to let me go." Marcus didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound hollow. So he just sat with her in the silence, two people trying to make sense of a tragedy that had no easy answers. Eventually, they banked the fire and retreated into the tent. The temperature dropped brutally overnight, and even in their sleeping bags, the cold was relentless. Marcus woke several times, listening to the wind, making sure the tent was secure. Each time, he could hear Sarah's breathing, uneven, restless, like she was caught in dreams she couldn't escape. Morning came cold and clear. They broke camp quickly, eager to keep moving, eager to reach the treehouse before nightfall. The final leg of the journey was the hardest. The terrain grew steeper, the snow deeper, and several times they had to stop and rest, their legs burning, their lungs screaming. But Marcus pushed forward, recognizing landmarks now, the ridge, the cluster of ancient pines, the way the trees grew together in a pattern that looked almost deliberate. And then, finally, he saw it. The treehouse, perched high in the pines exactly as he'd left it. He stopped and pointed. "There." Sarah followed his gaze, her breath catching. She stared up at the structure, her expression unreadable. Then she started walking toward it, faster now, almost running through the snow. Marcus followed, letting her lead. She reached the base of the ladder and looked up, her hands gripping the frozen rungs. "He built this," she whispered. "With his own hands." Marcus nodded. "Took him 2 months, according to the journal. Hauled every piece of lumber up here in a backpack." Sarah started climbing. Marcus waited at the bottom, giving her space, letting her have this moment alone. He heard the door creak open above, heard her footsteps on the wooden floor, heard her voice, muffled and broken, saying something he couldn't quite make out. After a few minutes, she appeared in the doorway and looked down at him. Her face was streaked with tears, but her expression was something Marcus hadn't seen before. Not just grief, not just anger, something closer to peace. "Come up," she called. "Show me everything." Marcus climbed the ladder and stepped inside. The treehouse looked exactly as he'd left it. The stove, the shelves, the sleeping platform. He'd cleaned up before he left, put everything back in its place, but the space still carried the weight of history. Sarah moved through the room slowly, touching the walls, the shelves, the stove. She picked up the kerosene lamp and turned it over in her hands. "He touched this," she said softly. "He used this. He lived here." Marcus gave her time to explore before moving to the hidden floorboard. "The safe is under here," he said. "Do you want to see it?" Sarah turned to him, her eyes wide. "Yes, show me." Marcus knelt and pried up the board, revealing the black military-grade safe beneath. He entered the combination slowly, the same 8 digits he'd figured out from Morrison's maps. The lock clicked. The door swung open, and Sarah Morrison saw for the first time what her father had died protecting. She sank to her knees beside the safe, staring at the stacks of cash, the gold bars, the folders of bonds. Her hand reached out, trembling, and touched one of the bundles. "Oh my God," she breathed. "It's real, it's all real." Marcus crouched beside her. 9 million in cash, another 6 million in gold, maybe 50 million in bonds and securities, possibly more. And according to your father's notes, this is just one cache. He had at least 2 others hidden in different locations. Sarah looked at him, her expression stunned. 260 million. He actually did it. He actually took it and hid it. Marcus nodded. And he left instructions. He wanted it used to help people. Communities destroyed by the drug trade, families with nothing. He listed targets in his journal, specific towns, specific needs. He had a plan. He just ran out of time to execute it. Sarah sat back, overwhelmed, her breathing shallow. "What am I supposed to do with this? I'm a high school English teacher. I don't know anything about moving money or building foundations or any of this." Marcus sat beside her, his voice calm. "You're not supposed to do it alone. That's why I came to find you. Your father left this for someone to finish. That someone is us, together." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, searching his face for answers, for reassurance, for something solid to hold on to. "Why would you help me? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Marcus thought about his own daughter, the one he barely saw anymore, the one who'd grown up thinking her father cared more about strangers in the mountains than his own family. He thought about the hiker he'd failed to save 5 years ago, the one whose death had driven him into exile. He thought about all the mistakes he'd made, all the ways he'd let people down. "Because," he said quietly, "your father gave me a second chance. He saved my life when that storm hit, and he left me a mission, something bigger than myself, something that might actually matter. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for him, and maybe for me too." Sarah nodded slowly. Then she reached into the safe and pulled out one of the photographs tucked into the folders. It was Morrison, older than the other pictures, thinner, his face lined with exhaustion. He was standing outside the treehouse, snow on the ground, bundled in a heavy coat. Someone else had taken the photo, someone Marcus hadn't read about yet. Sarah turned it over. On the back, in Morrison's handwriting, "Last photo, winter 87. If you're reading this, Sarah, know that I loved you every day, every moment, even when I couldn't be there." Sarah pressed the photo to her chest and closed her eyes. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't make a sound. Marcus looked away, giving her privacy, staring out the small window at the endless snow. After a long moment, Sarah spoke. "Okay," she said, her voice stronger now. "Okay, let's finish what he started." Marcus turned back to her. "It's not going to be easy. We'll need to move carefully, set up shell companies, convert the bonds slowly, funnel money into legitimate projects without raising red flags. It could take years." Sarah wiped her face and met his eyes. "I don't care how long it takes." My father spent 2 years alone in the woods protecting this. I can spend the rest of my life making sure it goes to the right people." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, something that had been locked down for years. Hope, maybe, or purpose. He extended his hand. "Partners?" Sarah looked at his hand, then took it firmly. "Partners." They shook, and in that moment, standing in a frozen treehouse over a fortune that had cost 2 lives and ruined another, a pact was made. Not for wealth, not for glory, but for justice, for redemption, for all the people Morrison had wanted to help, but never got the chance to reach. They spent the next hour going through everything in the safe, documenting what was there, taking photographs, making notes. Sarah found more letters tucked into the folders, some addressed to her, others to people she didn't recognize. Marcus found additional coordinates hidden in the bond certificates, coded references to the other caches Morrison had mentioned. They worked together, methodically, 2 people beginning to understand the weight of what they'd inherited. As the sun started to set, Marcus knew they needed to head back. Spending another night on the mountain was risky, and they'd already been gone longer than planned. "We should go," he said. "Get back to town, start figuring out our next steps." Sarah nodded, but she didn't move. She was staring at the journal, open to one of the final pages. "He wrote something here," she said. "The last entry. I didn't see it before." Marcus moved beside her and read over her shoulder. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible, written by a man who was clearly very sick. "November 23rd, 87. Can't breathe right anymore, coughing blood. Probably won't make it to December. If this is the end, then so be it. I made my choice. I chose to stand for something, even if it meant standing alone. Sarah, if you ever read this, know that leaving you was the hardest thing I ever did, but keeping you safe was the most important. Be strong, little navigator. Finish the journey I couldn't. Make the world better than I left it. I'll be watching. Dad." Sarah's shoulders shook. Marcus put a hand on her back, steady, grounding. "He was proud of you," Marcus said. "He didn't know who you'd become, but he believed in you. That's what this whole thing is. It's his belief that you'd be strong enough, brave enough to do what needed to be done." Sarah closed the journal carefully and stood. "Then let's not let him down." They sealed the safe, replaced the floorboard, and made sure everything looked undisturbed. Then they climbed down the ladder and started the long trek back through the snow. The descent was faster, but no less exhausting. They reached their previous campsite just as darkness fell, and spent another cold night huddled by the fire, too tired to talk, too wired to sleep well. The next morning, they pushed hard, covering the final miles back to the trailhead by early afternoon. They loaded into Marcus's truck, cranked the heat, and sat in silence for a long moment, thawing out, processing everything. Finally, Sarah spoke. "What happens now?" Marcus started the engine. "Now we go home. We take some time to think, and then we start building a plan, quietly, carefully. We find people we can trust, experts in finance, law, logistics. We set up the infrastructure to move money without triggering alarms, and we start identifying projects, real projects, the kind your father would have approved of." Sarah nodded. "I have some contacts, people I went to college with who work in non-profits, social workers, community organizers, people who know where the need is greatest." Marcus glanced at her. "Good. We'll need them. But Sarah, we have to be smart about this. If word gets out that we found Morrison's cache, we're both dead. The people who killed his partners, they might be retired, they might be dead, but there are always more. Always someone willing to kill for that kind of money." Sarah's expression hardened. "Then we don't tell anyone what we found. We just start helping people. And if anyone asks where the money's coming from, we say it's from private donors who want to remain anonymous." Marcus smiled faintly. "Your father would have liked that." They drove back toward Las Cruces, the truck eating up miles of highway as the sun sank lower. Sarah stared out the window, watching the mountains recede in the rearview mirror. "He's really gone," she said quietly. "I spent 40 years thinking he died a hero. Then I spent one day thinking he was a criminal. Now I know he was both, and neither. He was just a man who tried to do the right thing and paid the price for it. Marcus didn't respond. There was nothing to add. She was right. Morrison was complicated, flawed, human, and he'd left behind a legacy that would take a lifetime to unpack. When they reached Las Cruces, Marcus dropped Sarah at her aunt's house. She grabbed her pack and paused before getting out. "Thank you," she said, "for coming to find me, for showing me the truth, for not just taking the money and disappearing." Marcus met her eyes. "Your father trusted me with this, even though he never met me. The least I can do is honor that trust." Sarah nodded. "I'll call you in a few days. We'll start putting together a plan." She climbed out of the truck and headed toward the house. Marcus watched her go, then pulled away, heading back toward Colorado. As he drove through the night, his mind raced with possibilities, challenges, risks. But for the first time in 5 years, he wasn't running from something. He was running toward it, and that made all the difference. 3 weeks passed before Marcus heard from Sarah again. He'd returned to his cabin in Colorado, gone back to guiding small groups through winter trails, pretending everything was normal while his mind spun constantly with plans, contingencies, and the weight of what he and Sarah had discovered. When his phone finally rang with her number, he was sitting at his kitchen table surrounded by notebooks filled with ideas he couldn't yet act on. "I've been doing research," Sarah said without preamble. "I found someone who might be able to help us. His name is David Chen, and he's a financial consultant who specializes in setting up charitable foundations. He's clean, no connections to federal agencies, and he's helped several nonprofits navigate complex donation structures. I went to grad school with his sister. She vouches for him." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "How much does he know?" "Nothing yet," Sarah replied. "I told him I had a potential client who wanted to set up a private foundation with significant assets. Anonymous donor. He's interested but cautious. He wants to meet both of us before he commits to anything." Marcus thought about it. They needed someone with expertise, someone who understood how to move money legitimately without triggering investigations. But bringing in a third person meant expanding the circle of trust, and that was dangerous. "When and where?" he asked. "Next week. Santa Fe, neutral territory, public place, coffee shop on the plaza." Marcus nodded even though she couldn't see him. "Okay, I'll be there. But Sarah, if anything feels wrong, if he asks questions that seem off, we walk away, immediately." "Agreed," she said. "I'll text you the details." They met on a cold February morning in a coffee shop that smelled like roasted beans and cinnamon. David Chen was younger than Marcus expected, maybe 35, wearing casual clothes and glasses, looking more like a graduate student than a financial consultant. He shook hands with both of them, his grip firm but not aggressive, and gestured to a corner table away from the windows. "Sarah speaks highly of you," he said to Marcus as they sat down. "She says you're someone who can be trusted." Marcus studied him carefully. "Trust goes both ways. What did she tell you about why we're here?" David pulled out a notebook and set it on the table. "She said you have access to significant funds, 8 figures potentially, from a private donor who wants to remain completely anonymous. The donor wants the money used for specific humanitarian purposes, addiction recovery, family services, community rebuilding in underserved areas. You need help structuring this in a way that's legal, sustainable, and doesn't attract unwanted attention." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's accurate. What she didn't tell you is why the donor needs to remain anonymous." David's expression didn't change. "I assumed it was either because the money came from a source that might raise questions, or because the donor has enemies who would interfere if they knew about it, or both." Sarah glanced at Marcus, surprised by David's directness. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "And that doesn't bother you, not knowing where the money came from?" David shrugged. "I've worked with enough wealthy people to know that fortunes are rarely clean. Old money usually came from something exploitative a few generations back. New money often involves legal gray areas. What matters to me is what you're planning to do with it now." If you're genuinely trying to help people, if the projects are legitimate, then I'm willing to help you navigate the system. But I need to know you're serious, and I need to know you're not going to disappear on me halfway through. Marcus and Sarah exchanged a look. This was the moment. Either they brought David in fully, or they walked away and tried to figure it out alone. Sarah spoke first. We're serious. This isn't about getting rich or hiding assets. This is about finishing something that someone else started 40 years ago, someone who died trying to do the right thing. David listened, his expression thoughtful. Okay, then here's what I need. First, I need time to research foundation structures, tax implications, and reporting requirements. Second, I need a rough estimate of total assets so I know what we're working with. And third, I need your commitment that if we do this, we do it right. No shortcuts, no trying to move money under the table. Everything legal, everything documented, everything defensible if anyone ever comes asking. Marcus nodded. You'll get all of that, but we have one condition. You never ask us directly where the money came from. You don't dig into the source. You take our word that it's not stolen from victims, it's not tied to active criminal enterprises, and it's not going to bring law enforcement down on legitimate projects. David considered this, then extended his hand. Deal. Give me 2 weeks to put together a proposal. Then we'll meet again and start building the infrastructure. They shook on it, all three of them, and for the first time since finding the treehouse, Marcus felt like this might actually be possible. Over the next 2 months, David worked quietly in the background while Marcus and Sarah began identifying potential projects. Sarah used her connections in education and social work to find communities that needed help but weren't on anyone's radar, small towns in New Mexico, Arizona, and Colorado where the drug trade had left deep scars. Towns where clinics had closed, where schools were underfunded, where families struggled with addiction and poverty with no support systems in place. Marcus, meanwhile, started the delicate process of converting some of the bonds. He worked with a broker David recommended, someone who specialized in estate liquidations and didn't ask too many questions. He sold 2 bonds, $200,000 total, and used the money to fund the first project. A mobile medical clinic in a rural New Mexico town that hadn't had a doctor in 5 years. The clinic was run by a nurse practitioner named Rosa Martinez, who'd grown up in the area and refused to leave despite having offers from hospitals in bigger cities. When Marcus and Sarah approached her with an offer to fund a fully equipped van, medical supplies, and her salary for 2 years, she'd stared at them like they were speaking another language. "Who are you people?" she'd asked, suspicious and hopeful in equal measure. "Private donors," Sarah had said smoothly. "People who believe that healthcare is a right, not a privilege. We're funding projects in underserved communities. Yours was recommended to us. Are you interested?" Rosa had accepted, and within 6 weeks, the mobile clinic was operational. Marcus and Sarah attended the quiet launch event, standing in the back of the small crowd, watching as families lined up to see a doctor for the first time in years. An older woman with diabetes finally got her prescriptions refilled. A child with an ear infection got antibiotics. A teenager struggling with depression got a referral to a counselor 2 towns over who'd agreed to see patients on a sliding scale. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't headline news, but it was real, and it was exactly what Morrison had wanted. Sarah stood beside Marcus, tears streaming down her face as she watched. "He would have loved this," she whispered. Marcus nodded, his own throat tight. Yeah, he would have. They funded 3 more projects over the next 4 months. A community center in a small Arizona town that offered after-school programs and job training, a scholarship fund for kids whose parents were incarcerated, a renovation of a women's shelter that had been operating out of a building with no heat and a leaking roof. Each project was small, targeted, and life-changing for the people it served. And each one was funded anonymously through the foundation David had set up, a private entity called the Navigator Fund, named after Morrison's nickname for his daughter. But as the projects grew, so did the risks. Marcus started noticing things. A black SUV that seemed to appear in his rearview mirror too often. Clicks on his phone line that hadn't been there before. a stranger at a coffee shop who asked too many questions about where he got his funding. He didn't mention it to Sarah at first, didn't want to worry her. But when she called one night, her voice tight with fear, he knew she'd noticed things too. "Someone's been watching my house," she said. "I've seen the same car parked down the street 3 times this week. Different times of day, but always the same car. Dark blue sedan, tinted windows." Marcus's stomach dropped. "Have you confronted them? Gotten a license plate?" "I tried. The car left before I could get close. But Marcus, I'm scared. What if someone figured out what we're doing? What if they know about the money?" Marcus forced his voice to stay calm. "Okay, listen to me. Don't panic. This could be nothing. Could be a neighbor's relative, could be someone lost, but we're going to take precautions. First, vary your routine. Don't leave your house at the same time every day. Second, install a security camera if you don't already have one. Third, tell your aunt that if anyone comes asking about you or your father, she says nothing. She doesn't know anything." Sarah's breathing was rapid on the other end of the line. "What if it's not nothing? What if it's someone from my father's past?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He'd been dreading this possibility since the day he found the safe. Morrison had been clear in his journal that people had killed for this money. And while 40 years had passed, fortunes didn't just disappear from people's memories. Someone, somewhere, had been waiting for this money to surface. "If it is," Marcus said finally, "then we need to be smarter. We need to figure out who's watching and why. And we need to make sure the money is protected, even if something happens to us." Over the next week, Marcus did something he'd sworn he wouldn't do. He reached out to an old contact from his search and rescue days, a former FBI agent named Garrett Mills, who'd retired after 25 years and now ran a small private investigation firm. They met at a bar outside Denver, far from anywhere Marcus usually went. Garrett was in his 60s now, grey-haired and thick around the middle, but his eyes were still sharp. "You sounded spooked on the phone," Garrett said, nursing a beer. "What's going on?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "I need to know if someone's running surveillance on me or an associate of mine. I need to know who and why, but I need it done quietly. No official channels, no reports filed." Garrett studied him. "You in trouble?" "Not yet," Marcus said. "But I might be." Garrett nodded slowly. "Give me the details, locations, descriptions, anything you've noticed. I'll poke around, see what I can find. But Marcus, if this is something federal, if you're caught up in something over your head, I can't protect you." Marcus slid a piece of paper across the table with the information about the cars, the locations, the times. "I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm just asking you to tell me what I'm dealing with." Garrett pocketed the paper. "Give me a week." 6 days later, Garrett called. "We need to talk, in person, now." They met at the same bar, but this time Garrett looked grim. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, surveillance logs, and a name. "The car watching your friend in New Mexico, registered to a shell company out of Virginia. That shell company is owned by another shell company, which eventually traces back to a private security firm that does contract work for 3-letter agencies." Marcus felt his blood go cold. "Federal?" Garrett shook his head. "Not exactly. More like retired federal. Ex-DEA, ex-CIA, guys who left the agencies but still have connections. They hire out for jobs that need to stay off the books. The car watching you? Different company, but same profile. Someone's paying for professional surveillance." Marcus leaned back, his mind racing. "Why? What do they think we have?" Garrett met his eyes. "That's the question, isn't it? These guys don't come cheap. Whoever hired them thinks you and your friend have something valuable. Valuable enough to justify spending serious money to watch you." Marcus closed the folder. "Can you find out who hired them?" Garrett shook his head. "Not without making noise. These outfits are designed to be opaque. But I can tell you this, if they were planning to move on you, they would have already. The fact that they're just watching means they're waiting for something. Waiting for you to lead them somewhere, or to make contact with someone, or to move something they want." Marcus understood. They were waiting for him and Sarah to access the full cash. to reveal the locations of the other sites Morrison had hidden, to bring the entire fortune into the open. "What do we do?" Marcus asked. Garrett leaned forward. "You have two options. One, you walk away. Stop whatever you're doing, cut ties with your friend, disappear for a while until they lose interest. Or two, you play dumb. Keep doing what you're doing, but assume you're being watched every second. Don't go anywhere you don't want them to know about. Don't contact anyone you don't want exposed. And for God's sake, don't access anything that would confirm what they're looking for." Marcus nodded slowly. Walking away wasn't an option. He'd made a promise to Morrison, to Sarah, to himself, but playing dumb that he could do. "Thanks, Garrett. I owe you." Garrett waved him off. "Just don't get yourself killed. I'm too old to come to another funeral." Marcus called Sarah as soon as he left the bar. He told her everything Garrett had said, leaving nothing out. When he finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Sarah spoke. "So we're being watched by professionals, people who think we know where my father's money is." "Yes," Marcus said, "which means we can't go back to the treehouse. We can't access the other caches, not until we figure out how to lose the surveillance." Sarah's voice hardened. "Then we don't go back. We work with what we've already moved. We keep funding projects, keep helping people, and we let whoever's watching think we're just two people with modest resources trying to do good work." Marcus felt a surge of admiration for her calm resolve. That'll work for a while, but eventually they'll get impatient. They'll want answers. "Let them want," Sarah said. "My father waited 40 years for someone to find his legacy. We can wait them out." Over the next year, that's exactly what they did. They continued funding projects, but carefully, modestly, never moving enough money to suggest they had access to a fortune. They communicated mostly through encrypted apps, varied their routines constantly, and lived as though they were always being watched, because they were. The Navigator Fund grew slowly but steadily. They helped 12 communities, funded 8 clinics, supported 6 schools, and provided resources for hundreds of families. The work was exhausting, often frustrating, and occasionally heartbreaking when a project failed or a community leader turned out to be corrupt. But more often than not, it succeeded. Marcus watched as towns that had been dying began to stabilize. He saw kids who'd had no future suddenly have options. He saw families torn apart by addiction find pathways to recovery. And he realized that Morrison had been right. The money wasn't the point. The money was just a tool. What mattered was the will to use it, the courage to keep going even when the risks were high, the faith that small acts of compassion could ripple outward into something larger. One afternoon in late autumn, Marcus sat in a community center they'd helped fund in southern Colorado, watching a group of teenagers participate in a job training program. One of them, a girl maybe 16 with bright eyes and a nervous smile, approached him during a break. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you one of the donors?" Marcus shook his head. "Just a volunteer. Why?" The girl hesitated, then spoke in a rush. "My mom, she's been clean for 6 months because of the recovery program you guys funded, and I'm going to graduate high school because of the tutoring. I just wanted to say thank you to whoever made this happen. Because 2 years ago, I thought we were done. I thought we'd never get out. But now, I don't know. It feels like maybe we can." Marcus felt his eyes sting. He cleared his throat. "I'll make sure the donors know. They'll be glad to hear it." The girl smiled and walked back to her group. Marcus sat there for a long time afterward, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of Morrison's mission settle into his bones, not as a burden, but as a gift. That night, he called Sarah. "I think your father would be proud," he said when she answered. Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I think he'd tell us we're just getting started." She was right. Over the next 2 years, the Navigator Fund expanded its reach. They brought in more consultants, more community organizers, more people who believed in the mission and could be trusted to execute it. David became a full partner, managing the foundation's finances with meticulous care. They developed systems for vetting projects, for measuring impact, for ensuring that money went where it was supposed to go. And slowly, carefully, they began accessing more of the bonds Morrison had left behind. Not all at once, not in ways that would raise alarms, just enough to sustain the work and expand into new areas. The surveillance never fully went away. Marcus still noticed cars sometimes, still caught glimpses of people who seemed too interested in his movements. But whoever was watching seemed to have accepted that he and Sarah were exactly what they appeared to be, two people with access to modest wealth doing charitable work, not the kind of people who had access to $260 million, which was exactly what Marcus and Sarah wanted them to think. 3 years after finding the treehouse, Marcus returned to the mountains. Not to the treehouse itself, that was still too risky, but to the general area. He hiked alone, retracing some of the paths he'd taken during that storm, thinking about how much had changed. He was 51 now, graying at the temples, lines deepening around his eyes. But he felt younger somehow, more alive, more present. He'd reconnected with his daughter over the past year, slowly rebuilding a relationship he'd thought was beyond repair. She didn't know about the money or the mission, but she knew her father had changed, had found something worth living for beyond his own guilt. As Marcus stood on a ridge overlooking the valley, his phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. New project approved. Women's Recovery Center in Taos. 50 beds, full medical staff, opening next spring. Marcus smiled and typed back, "Your father would love that." Sarah's response came quickly. "He'd love all of it. We're not done yet." Marcus pocketed his phone and started the hike back down. She was right. They weren't done. Morrison's journal had listed dozens of communities that needed help. The Navigator Fund had reached maybe a quarter of them so far. There were years of work ahead, decades maybe, but that was okay. This wasn't a sprint, it was a marathon, and Marcus was finally running towards something instead of away. By the time the 5th anniversary of finding the treehouse arrived, the Navigator Fund had distributed over $20 million to 63 projects across 7 states. They'd helped thousands of people directly and tens of thousands indirectly through the ripple effects of healthier, more stable communities. The work had been featured in a few small newspapers, always framed as the efforts of an anonymous donor with a passion for rural America. Sarah gave interviews occasionally, always careful to deflect questions about funding sources, always steering the conversation back to the people being helped. Marcus stayed in the background, content to let Sarah be the public face while he managed logistics and security. They'd become a team, bound not by blood, but by shared purpose and mutual respect. And though they'd never accessed the full fortune Morrison had hidden, though 2/3 of it remained untouched in locations only they knew, they'd proven the concept. They'd shown that one person's choice to stand for something could echo across decades and change lives long after they were gone. One winter evening, Sarah called Marcus from Taos. "I'm at my dad's grave," she said softly. "I come here sometimes, talk to him, tell him what we've been doing." Marcus didn't respond, just listened. "I used to be so angry," Sarah continued. "Angry that he left, angry that he chose a mission over me, but I understand now. He didn't choose the mission over me. He chose it for me, for the world he wanted me to grow up in. And now I get to finish what he started. I get to prove that his sacrifice meant something." Her voice cracked. "I just wish he could see it, see what we've built, see that it worked." Marcus spoke quietly. "I think he can. Wherever he is, I think he knows." They sat in silence for a while, connected across hundreds of miles by a bond forged in frozen mountains and sustained by shared belief. Finally, Sarah spoke again. "There's something I need to tell you. I've been thinking about the other caches, the ones we haven't touched." Marcus tensed. "What about them?" "I think we should leave them," Sarah said. "Sealed, hidden, for someone else to find someday. The way you found the treehouse. Maybe in another 40 years, maybe sooner. But let them stay buried until someone needs them the way you needed them. The way I needed them." Marcus considered this. The practical part of him wanted to argue that they could do so much more with the full amount, could help so many more people. But the deeper part of him, the part that understood what Morrison had really been trying to do, knew Sarah was right. This wasn't just about distributing money. It was about creating a legacy that transcended any one person or generation. It was about proving that hope could be buried and still grow. "Okay," Marcus said, "we leave them, for whoever comes next." Sarah exhaled, relief evident in her voice. "Thank you. For everything. For finding him. For finding me. For helping me understand who my father really was." "Thank you," Marcus replied, "for giving me a reason to stop running." They said their goodbyes, and Marcus stood in his cabin, looking at the journal he still kept on his shelf. He'd read it so many times he'd memorized whole passages, but he opened it one more time to the final page, to Morrison's last words. "Don't let my death be for nothing." Marcus traced the words with his finger, then closed the book gently. "It wasn't," he whispered to the empty room. "It meant everything." The years continued to unfold. The Navigator Fund grew into something larger than Marcus or Sarah had imagined. They brought in younger people to help manage it, people who believed in the mission and could carry it forward when Marcus and Sarah were too old to continue. David became the executive director, transforming it from a small private foundation into a model that other philanthropists studied and tried to replicate. Marcus eventually retired from guiding, though he never stopped hiking the mountains. He'd lead groups of at-risk youth into the wilderness sometimes, teaching them survival skills, showing them that they were stronger than they believed. He never told them about the treehouse or the fortune or the man who died protecting it. But he told them that sometimes, when you're lost and cold and certain you can't go on, shelter appears. Not because you deserve it, not because you earned it, but because someone, somewhere, believed you were worth saving. Sarah continued teaching, but she also started a writing program for students in the communities the Navigator Fund served. She taught them to tell their own stories, to document their struggles and triumphs, to create a record so that future generations would understand what they'd overcome. And in her own private journal, she wrote letters to her father. Letters she'd never send but needed to write. Letters that said, "Thank you, and I forgive you, and I understand now, and I'm proud to be your daughter." On the 10th anniversary of finding the treehouse, Marcus made one final trip to the site. He'd notified Sarah, and she'd flown out to meet him. They hiked up together, older and slower now, but still capable. The treehouse was still there, weathered but standing, a monument to one man's refusal to give up even when everything else had been taken from him. They climbed up together and sat inside as snow began to fall outside, just like the storm that had brought Marcus here a decade earlier. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked. "Finding this place? Getting involved in all of this?" Marcus thought about his life before the treehouse, the emptiness, the guilt, the sense that his best years were behind him. Then he thought about the life he'd built after, the purpose, the connections, the knowledge that he'd helped create something that would outlive him. "Not for a second," he said. Sarah nodded. "Me neither." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd been strangers once, bound now by a mission that had transformed them both. Outside, the storm grew stronger, but inside the treehouse they were warm, they were safe, and they were exactly where they were meant to be. Marcus pulled something from his pack, a small brass plaque he'd had made. Sarah watched as he used a screwdriver to attach it to the wall beside Morrison's desk. The plaque read simply, "James Patrick Morrison, 1943 to 1987. He chose to stand when others looked away. His courage echoes still." Sarah touched the plaque with trembling fingers, her eyes flooding with tears. "He would have hated the attention," she said with a broken laugh. "He always preferred to work in the shadows." Marcus smiled. "Then it's a good thing only we'll ever see it." They spent another hour in the treehouse, sharing stories, making plans for the future of the Navigator Fund, and simply being present in the space that had changed both their lives. When it was time to leave, Sarah took one last look around. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered, "for everything." As they descended the ladder and began the long hike back, Marcus felt something shift inside him. Not closure exactly, but completion. Morrison's mission wasn't finished. It would never truly be finished as long as people needed help. But the foundation had been laid. The work would continue. And somewhere in the mountains, hidden in locations known only to him and Sarah, the remainder of Morrison's fortune waited patiently for the next person who would stumble upon it in their darkest hour and choose, as Marcus had chosen, to carry the burden forward. Because some legacies aren't meant to be spent in a single generation. Some are meant to be discovered again and again, each time by someone who needs to learn the same lesson. That one person's courage, one person's choice to stand for something greater than themselves, can ripple forward through time in ways they'll never live to see. Anyone can change the world if they're willing to carry someone else's unfinished dream and have the courage to see it through. As the snow fell harder and the light faded, Marcus Kane and Sarah Morrison walked away from the treehouse that had saved one life and changed countless others, not as heroes seeking recognition, but as guardians of a legacy that proved one truth above all, that compassion, even buried beneath decades of snow and silence, never truly dies. It just waits for someone brave enough to dig. Because for Marcus, for Sarah, and for all the people they would help in the years to come, the real treasure was never the money. It was the reminder that broken things can still be fixed, that lost causes can still be won, and that sometimes the most important thing you can find in the frozen wilderness isn't shelter. It's purpose. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible true stories are waiting for you. Click to continue the journey with us, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that one person's courage can echo through generations.